Thank you for that, Michael. Hello, you're all very welcome to the E3's Balanced Solutions for a Better World webinar series 2025 to 2026. I'm Geraldine Herbert and I'm delighted to be the chair of today's events. Now, this monthly online series brings together experts and innovators from across the globe to explore balanced, practical solutions to some of the really pressing challenges facing our planet, from climate action, sustainable transport, to social equity and quality of life. As chair, it's great to be here to guide you through these discussions today. And as Michael said, I spend a lot of time talking and writing about transport and consumer issues. So I'm delighted to be here. Now, we're very pleased to welcome Professor Brian Caulfield from the School of Engineering here at Trinity College to today's event. Professor Caulfield is Professor of Transportation at the Department of Civil, Structural and Environmental Engineering and is a Fellow at Trinity College, Dublin. He is internationally recognised for his research on the environmental impacts of transport and on pathways to reducing transport-related carbon emissions. He has addressed the Irish Citizens' Assembly and advised the Climate Change Advisory Council on transport emission reduction pathways to 2030. And he has contributed to major national transport strategies, including the review of the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy with National Transport Authority. Now, with over 200 peer-reviewed publications, approximately 11 million in competitive research funding, and extensive leadership roles across national and international research networks and high-impact journals, Professor Caulfield brings exceptional expertise in the intersection of transport, climate policy and urban planning. Now, just a bit of background about the School of Engineering at Trinity College Dublin. I'm not sure if a lot of you are familiar with it or some of you may be very familiar, but it has a wide range of full-time and part-time master's programmes. And these include everything from engineering, mechanical engineering, zero carbon technologies and music and media technologies. Now, there are many others as well, and we would encourage you to check out the Trinity College website for full details. Now, back to today's talk. Today's talk really explores a decade of construction that is ahead for Irish cities as Ireland works towards its legally binding targets of reducing emissions, carbon emissions, and from transport by 50% by 2030. And Professor Caulfield will examine how major transport investments, Metrolink, Luas, DART, how all of these will contribute not only to emission reductions, but also to improving the quality of life that we enjoy and more livable cities. So there will be a number of things that Brian and topics that Brian will explore from large scale, from how we will achieve these large scale projects, but also how we will balance the disruption in the short term and balance the long-term benefits of social and economic benefits and environmental benefits, and also the role of public engagement. So I will hand you over now to Brian to give his talk, and we will have some time at the end for questions. A lot of you have submitted questions. I'm going to apologise in advance if we don't get to them all, but we will do our very best. So Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for that introduction, and to Michael as well for inviting me to speak at today's event. I'm just going to double check that you can see my slides or the starting slide.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Michael. So what I'm going to talk about today is build it and they will come. So basically it is, as Geraldine mentioned, an overview of the big transport projects that we have planned in the capital, a lot of them which will be right around our campus, and there's a large amount of connectivity to our campus already, but it's going to improve. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the scene and the challenges that we currently face in transport here in Ireland, and they are massive in terms of delivery and in terms of how we're going to deliver the volume of transport that we currently have on our books. But the first slide here talks about, I suppose this encapsulates the big challenges that we have. The first one being, as was mentioned, we have to reduce our transport emissions in a legally binding target by 50% by the end of the decade, which is a mammoth task. It's a task in which perhaps no other country has actually ever been able to achieve such a thing in such a short space of time. The leading modelling that's been done on this by the Environmental Protection Agency says that we will fall short in transport, and I suspect we probably will. But the ambition is there, and in a lot of cases, the budget is there to deliver what we need to do. The second big challenge is how do we keep people moving across our country and have more people in our country? And how do we move an island of maybe 7+ million people using the current modes that we have and the new modes? And then the final image there kind of shows we're almost in stagnation when it comes to trying to change our transport networks. And I'll show you some data from the National Transport Authority that looks at how we move across our country and how that's not changing anywhere near quick enough in order for us to meet our ambitions. So I suppose at the start, these are the kind of main things that I see as our problems in transport. Our emissions have come down very marginally, probably within statistical significance. They've come down, but it's one of the stickiest areas in terms of reducing our emissions. Energy and housing and all those other areas, and agriculture, they've been able to reduce their emissions quite quickly. Well, not as quickly as we would want, but they're showing progress where transport really isn't. Dublin is the third most congested city in the world. This is from the TomTom index. There's constantly indices coming out to show that we're on the wrong end of any of these transport metrics. Currently, there are about 1.1 million people in Ireland with a disability, and only about 6% of those people use public transport on a daily basis or on a regular basis. So that's another massive challenge we have. In terms of, I've more up-to-date information on this, but in terms of the amount of trips that we're making, the modal share shows that over 70% of our trips are still being made by private car. There's about 1,300 premature deaths that occur every year in Ireland due to poor air quality. Not all of this can be attributed to transport, but transport is a big contributor to it. The National Development Plan, this is a more positive thing, has said that we'll spend 35 billion on transport by the end of the decade. So the money is there. I think in a lot of cases now the political will is there as well to deliver these projects. And then finally there, in terms of our road casualties, that's continually trending upwards, and we really need to grasp that issue. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to meet our climate targets in transport? These are kind of the broad brush strokes of what we need to do. We need to increase our active travel trips by 50%. We need to sell almost 1 million electric vehicles by 2030. We need to reduce our fossil fuel usage by 50%. We need to decrease the distances that are driven by 20%. And there needs to be a 130% increase in the daily number of public transport trips. So all of these are massively daunting, and all of these are the kind of things that I talk to our students about through our undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, and it's the kind of things that all of my researchers are working on at the moment, and a number of our projects that we're working on look at each of these different areas. Our population, these are projections from the CSO. It's expected to hit over 7 million by 2057. So we need to move more people across our cities and towns, and there isn't the space to expand. So say, for example, one of the things I always tell our students is in transport in Dublin, we obviously have a transport problem, but we have a space problem. We can't move people in the way we're currently moving them. If our populations are going to increase by the way in which we expect, the current networks aren't sufficient. So road-based transport is not going to be the way in which we move the majority of people around our country. So this comes from every year the National Transport Authority produce the household travel survey. And the household travel survey, basically, it's a sample of people, and it asks, the types of trips that they make, where they go to, and what modes of transport are available to them. It is the best source of data that we have on an annual basis, and this is one of the snapshots from this database. And it shows that what do you live within a 15-minute walk of? So here you can see that about 3.7 million people in Ireland live within a 15-minute walk of a shop, a pub or restaurant, a bus stop. The one thing about the bus stop I'll say there is that it doesn't say the frequency of the bus service. It could be a bus that comes maybe once or twice a day, or it could be a bus stop in Dublin that has multiple services per hour. So you can see these are the things that people want to move to and get to. And that's what this data shows us. And it gives us a snapshot every year of how this is progressing. This shows us the types of trips and the reasons why people are making trips. And this goes from 2017 to 2024 was the last publication from the NTA on this. The first data point there, and it's something that's been making a lot of headlines recently, is working from home as perhaps a solution to the crippling congestion we see right across the state. And what it shows there is in 2017, about 28% of all the trips we make were for work or business. And that dropped obviously during COVID. And then you can see last year it had an increase by 1%. You can see education trips, shopping trips, social trips. So these are all of the types of trips we make. So when we're studying transport, you really need to you take a step back from the vehicle, you take a step back from the road network, and you look to see what is it that people are doing? Why are people traveling in the way that they're traveling? And these are the reasons why people are traveling the way they're traveling. Some of these are fixed. So I would argue that perhaps the first two there are fixed, work and education, because of the times in which we have to work and we open our universities and schools and colleges. The rest are more flexible. So it's working within these types of trips to try and imagine ways or try to accommodate ways to reduce our congestion and to achieve the goals that we have in terms of a 50% reduction in emissions. This is probably the most sobering slide in terms of our progress to date. So the very top there, you can see the number of car trips. In 2012, it was 70.1% of all of our trips were made by car. In 2024, that was 71.3%. So despite the investments that we're putting into transport and into active travel as well, we're really not shifting the dial anywhere near quick enough when it comes to reducing our car dependency. And the key ways of doing that, there are a number of ways that we can do that, but the key way that I suppose I'm going to argue today is by grasping the nettle and spending the money and building the big projects that we've knocked around about in our country and in Dublin for well over 30 years. This then shows the mode share. So obviously Dublin is very different to the national mode share. So car trips in Dublin make up about 54% of all of our trips, compared to 71% nationally. And there you can see the breakdown then between other modes of transport. So in Dublin, walking is and considering the amount of investment we actually put into walking, 30% of all of our trips in Dublin and our suburbs are made by walking. There you can see public transport, which is about 7% in Dublin, and cycling is about 5% compared to 2% nationally. So shifting the dial on both of these will help us achieve the goals that I set out at the start in terms of reducing our emissions. One of the things about Ireland is how our population is distributed. About a quarter of our population live here in Dublin and in its suburbs. And then you can see the distribution of our population. So this comes from the 2022 census. And you can see at the end there about as many people live in what's defined as the remainder of the country as live in the capital. So those people are the people that are the hardest to shift over to other modes of transport because of the density in the areas in which they live in. So this is one of the things that sets the scene. It shows us what we have to deal with in terms of reducing our overall national emissions by 2030. Then how do we compare against the rest of the EU? This is the EU average there. Ireland is the number of people we have per square kilometre is about 72, compared to the EU average, which is here of 186 people per square kilometre. So we're relatively sparsely populated island. Not so much, I suppose, in Dublin, where we're pretty densely populated and big modes of transport or big kind of, I suppose, more densely populated areas can accommodate things like metros and Luas. But it shows the situation that we're in. There's a lot of metrics that you can look at Ireland right across the EU and see where we fit. One of them would be as well in Ireland, only 3% of our rail network is electrified, which puts us last in class when it comes to rail networks in Europe. In terms of our population growths, so this shows the population growths that are expected in Dublin, up to 1.4 million people under a high scenario, 1.466 million or 1.408 million under a low population growth scenario to 2040 compared to 2016 of 1.1 million people. So it's moving these extra people and accommodating these extra people when we know that our current system and our current networks are massively congested. This then shows us what the estimated cost of congestion is likely to be. So there's a core scenario and there's an alternative fuel scenario here. So this is research that was done by the Department of Transport, and it shows that out to 2040, congestion could cost our city 1.5 billion euro per year. And it's not only that economic cost, and that economic cost comes from people being delayed in transport networks, but it's also the air quality, it's also the well-being, it's also all of the other kind of macroeconomic indicators. Equally as well, a lot of what we're trying to do in Ireland and a lot of what we're doing in the capital is to try and attract international investment. But if people, one, can't find a place to live, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but then also two, can't get around. It's going to be very difficult to attract that investment and keep us where our economy is floating the way it currently is. This then shows the population growth targets for the other cities, for Waterford, Galway, Limerick, and Cork. And again, out to 2040, all of these cities and all of the populations for these cities is expected to increase out to 2040. And then how do we accommodate this and how do we get people to move around these cities? Equally, we've got costs of congestion for each of these areas too. The CMA is the Cork metropolitan area, Galway is the GMA is the Galway metropolitan area, and the WMA is the Waterford metropolitan area. The Limerick values weren't estimated by the Department of Transport, but I believe they are coming. But the one that really sticks out here is Galway. The costs of congestion, and anybody that's been to Galway or is from Galway or is listening from Galway will know what the costs of congestion are in that city. So this here you can see the cost of congestion in Galway by 2040 will be greater than that of Cork. And then this shows what the estimated cost of congestion will be per head of population. So by 2040, each person in Galway will be losing 800, nearly 900 euro per year in terms of the cost of congestion. And in Dublin, it will be over 1,000 euro per person. So these are costs that accrue to all of us. And that's why I suppose the public transport projects that I'm about to start to talk about need to happen. So we need to have resilience in our capacity to deliver the change that we want to deliver. So this slide shows the big projects that we want to deliver, and these are the ones that I'll talk about. So DART Plus, so that's basically spreading out DART in every direction from the current network, out 2 lines to the west and then north and south. Bus Connects, which is the project that's currently the only one of these projects that's currently under construction. The Lucan line is currently under construction. Finglas Luas, Lucan Luas, the Metro, which I'll talk about, and Luas Poolbag as well. So these are the big projects that we're currently talking about in the city. A lot of these are subject to change. A lot of the timelines on these have shifted. Metrolink is a project that has or a metro in some guise has been talked about nearly for 30 years in our city. So in terms of what we want to deliver over the next, by 2040, there's 18 kilometers of mainly underground metro line, 4 kilometers of a Luas Finglas, 11 kilometers of Lucan Luas, a Poolbeg extension of 2 kilometers, a 9-kilometer extension to Bray, and then in Cork, there's a 17-kilometer light rail system to be put in there. In Dublin, there's 16 bus connects routes, and then we have DART Plus. One of the other projects that's not talked about often enough is the Cork commuter rail. What they're doing in Cork in terms of commuter rail will transform that city. It's almost like they're getting the quality that we have in the DART system here in Dublin, in Cork, and that's going to be transformative. And then equally in Limerick, what is expected to be delivered in Limerick around commuter rail. The issue is It took us nearly 25 years to deliver the 40 kilometers of light rail that we currently have. And we want to deliver 61 kilometers of rail over the next 18 years. So that's one of the, I suppose, one of the key issues. We need to ramp up what we're doing. We need to ramp up the delivery of infrastructure. We need to become quicker at it. And I'll talk a lot about Metro in a few minutes, but we need to be much more efficient about it. And one of the things I think we really do need is a pipeline of projects. And if you look at countries around the world or cities around the world that have done this and have done this successfully, the key thing that they have in common is that they've had a pipeline of projects so that we don't sit back when we finish a project, pat ourselves on the back and go, right, take a break and then start to build again. It was 2017 was the last time we delivered a new light rail line in Dublin with the Luas Cross City. Um, and it'll probably be, I think I worked it out, it might be even 22 years before we deliver in terms of the time distance the next light rail line. We were much better at this at the start. When Luas first opened, we had extensions opening every couple of years, but that has stopped, and we need to get better at that. So we have a number of key issues, escalating costs. So Metro North, the original project, back when that was been talked about before the economic recession, was expected to cost about 2 billion. It looks like Metro could cost up to, depending upon the estimates, and it's been re-estimated at the moment how much it's likely to cost because it's being tendered for, and a real cost will come in. But it could be up to 12 billion, that project. We have capacity constraints within the construction sector. We've demand coming from every single side. Metro is going to require 8,000 construction workers and about 3,000 indirect jobs. And that in itself is so sobering because where do we put these people? Where do they live when the metro is being constructed? And I used this analogy recently. Dublin is like an old house, and you're going to do the engineering survey on it. It needs to be rewired. It needs a new plumbing system, and it needs a new transport system. So the workers that we need for Metro, we equally need them for every other area as well, in all of those different parts. And that's not just in Dublin. This type of construction needs to happen right across the country. In terms of our planning delays, Metro was with On Board Planola for 3 years. And as I mentioned already, that there's a lack of a pipeline of scheduled projects that it will ensure resilience in the construction. The other thing is, I do think that we've got a bit of, in terms of public transport delivery, we've paralysis by analysis. We managed to deliver a whole motorway network within a decade. There was one year we opened 200, and I think it was 250 kilometers of motorway, and our country would not be as prosperous as it is without that network. But when it comes to public transport, we overanalyze. It has a much higher burden of proof to get across the line these big public transport projects. So Metrolink. Metrolink is massively exciting. It's a massively daunting project. It's great to talk to students about it. However, I've been talking to students about Metrolink for about 20 years now, I think. It is going to transform the city. I've gone on record as saying it's the only show in town to move the amount of people that we want to move. However, it gets an awful lot of criticism. In terms of what it's going to do and how it's going to look in Trinity, it's going to come in. I know this image is a bit pale, but basically, it's going to come in through College Park, right past the cricket pitch, and then the rugby pitch, and it's going to go underneath the Simon Perry building, which is the home of civil engineering in Trinity. And those of you on the call that may remember Professor Perry. He was very much an advocate for sustainable mobility and was one of the key leading voices around light rail being reintroduced into Dublin. And indeed, there's a bridge at Charlemont named after the late Professor Perry. So Metro is going to go right underneath our civil engineering building. So in terms of a myth buster, there's an awful lot of myths out there about Metro and what it is and what it's not. And a lot of people, there's a lot of hot air when it comes to the Metro. I'm basing this in facts. I'm basing this on the figures that have been estimated for the project. Some people say that the metro is going to cost 25 billion, and that's at the very, very upper end of what the cost could be. And then when I say that to people, they say, "Oh, Brian, look at the Children's Hospital. Look what happened at the Children's Hospital." And yes, the Children's Hospital spectacularly went over budget. We don't build hospitals like that often in this country. Transport Infrastructure Ireland are able to build and deliver projects, and they have a very good history of delivering projects. The analogy I would use comparing Metro to the Children's Hospital would be like if we started tunneling for Metro and then decided, no, we won't go to the airport, we'll go to Navan instead. That's the type of change that happened on the Children's Hospital. And that's not going to happen on the Metro project. Where is the cost benefit analysis? This comes out constantly. Where is this cost benefit analysis? Who has done this analysis? Anybody that has access to the internet can find the cost benefit analysis that was done. There's 600 odd pages of a cost benefit analysis that's been done on Metrolink. This is typical of every single metro project right across the planet. The analysis is done beforehand. You get a preliminary business case to construct the project, which was established. Then, until you get a final price and you see the white in the eyes of the construction company that's going to build a project for you, you get the final price. Then you redo your cost benefit analysis, and then you see at the end, is the cost benefit ratio still there to go ahead with this project? Then it is sent to cabinet, and then hopefully it will proceed to construction. And to be honest, with Metro right now, this project has never been at a more advanced phase. In that tendering is happening for projects. There's a huge staff that are in place in Transport Infrastructure Ireland to deliver the project. So I've never been more positive on this actually being realised. And what does the cost benefit analysis say? Under many different scenarios, all of the cost benefit ratios are positive. And it says that over 60 years, and this was in the original one done back in 2021, which will have increased since then, over 60 years of user benefits will accrue almost 16 billion euro to the city. And this is one of the things that's often forgotten. People don't think about the cost of not having something. So when you look at the benefits of Metro, it will bring about 700,000 euro per day in transport user benefits to our city. So we're losing that. If you look at it from the other side, we're losing that per day by not having this metro system or this metro line in our city. Sure, the bus will do it. That's the other, or cars can do it, or we can have autonomous cars that will do it, or we'll put loads of tunnels under the city, and cars will be able to deliver all of that. You just have to look at the physical size of these vehicles to understand that this is not the case. One metro train is equal to about 5 buses, which is equal to about 200 cars. We cannot move the same amount of people that the metro will move by the other two modes of transport. It's just not possible. If we were to do it by bus, we would just end up with a huge queue of buses that go right across this city, and the bus congestion alone, taking out all of the cars, would cripple the city. They would not be able to move the 53 million passengers per year that Metro is expected to do. And equally with the cars, autonomous, not autonomous, they will not be able to do it because of the sheer physical size of these vehicles. And equally, there is no transport system anywhere on the planet that can move the amount of people across one line by any other mode of transport other than underground rail. It's not just an airport line. We get preoccupied. Yes, the airport is a stop on the metro. It is a very important stop on the metro, but it is not the only stop on the metro. 18% of the passengers that are going to use the metro will get on and off at the airport stop. So it's a hugely important stop, but it's not the only show in town. So it is not just an airport line. The Metrolink will connect about 175,000 people, almost 250,000 jobs, which will be within a 10-minute walk of this line. It will connect 127 schools, 5 hospitals, and 3 universities. So it will be the game changer that everybody, but that I've said publicly it will be, and it will connect. It will have massive implications for our city into the future. So build it and they will come. So I'm coming towards the end of what I want to say. One of the things I would say about public transport investment in our city is yes, and right across the country has been massively slow, and it's not kept up with the pace that we wanted to keep up with. But we've never regretted investment in public transport infrastructure in Ireland. When we opened the Luas, it was a victim of its own success very quickly, and that resulted in it needing to be expanded. Expanded on the Green Line. There's a plan for an expansion on the Red Line and equally on the DART. So in this case, let's look at the figures. So the orange line here at the top shows Dublin bus. Dublin is a bus-based city, but there's only we're with Bus Connects, we're starting to stretch the upper limits of what buses can do because of the constraints in terms of the space in our city. So from 20, I chose 2004 because that's the year the Luas opened, right up until last year, and the 2025 figures are estimates. Then you can see the Luas, the amount of passengers that it takes, and then the DART. So these the three main modes of public transport in our capital city. Obviously, you saw that there was a massive. You can see there's a massive downturn when COVID happened, and equally around the economic recession, you can see that there was a downtake. But right now, all of the trends in terms of public transport in Dublin are upward, and right across the country too. Last year was a record-breaking year. I think there was over 300 million public transport trips taken. We'll beat that again this year. And anyone that's using public transport right across our country will know that it's on thin ice. It's spread paper thin right across the country. And when there are events, and we saw two massive events happen last year in terms of resilience of public transport, just there before Christmas when the power lines went down on the Green Line and it was out of action for, I think, it was 36 hours, you saw the knock-on impacts that had. And then equally when the Spencer Dock Bridge, when the fire happened there and the bridge failed, the resilience in our network is paper thin. And then equally, when you look at the M50, the resilience there is paper thin too. If there's an accident or if there's an incident that happens on the M50, it ends up resulting in massive impacts right across our city. And equally, what I said there about the metro not being built and the 700,000 euro that we're losing per day, think about the costs to the people that are using the M50 and the other motorways and other roads around our country that are getting up earlier, leaving their kids earlier, having to spend more time stuck in congestion because of the poor infrastructure that we currently have. I'd also argue if COVID didn't happen, what's happening on the M50 would have happened 2 or 3 years ago. So, as Shirley mentioned at the start, one of the things that I was involved in was the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy, and I'm going to finish off by kind of talking about some of the things and some of the big projects that are within that. So these are the rail projects that I mentioned already that are expected to be delivered by 2042. So Metro being the big project, the extension of the Luas to Bray, a Lucan Luas line, which is so badly needed for the west side of our city, Finglas, Luas, and then the extension to Poolbeg. One of the things that this will do as well is enable housing to happen, or enable housing stock to have densely populated housing areas in and around our public transport, to have this transit-oriented design, which we're poorly lacking in Ireland, and we have an opportunity to do that now with the expansion of our public transport networks. And then equally, as I mentioned already, the DART projects. So DART Plus to the west part of the city, and then DART Southwest Plus. They'll connect Selbridge and Adamstown and Maynooth on a much more regular public transport, a much more regular train service into the city and in and around other parts of the Greater Dublin area. DART plus the coastal north and south, extending down as far as Wicklow. will transform our commuter rail network in the city. Also, the Navan line that is expected to be built after 2040. I would argue that this isn't happening quick enough, and we need to be doing it much. We need to be doing this much quicker than we're currently doing it because of the huge congestion costs. I suppose when we talk about climate and the emissions reduction, the current government and I suppose the current discussion around it is much more towards congestion than it is towards climate. But all of these things are massively interconnected. Then this map looks at the Luas lines that are proposed after 2042. So basically, one of the things that you'll see is that a lot of these will be existing bus connects routes that will be upgraded to light rail, and will provide a massive footprint of a radial network of light rail right across the greater Dublin area. And again, there's huge ambition here, but the pace at which we're going and our ability to deliver is something that I would be concerned about. So to conclude, we can no longer claim that there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what we need to do. We need to meet all of these challenges, I would say, head on. We know that the congestion is there. We can see the congestion is there, and we need to do this as quickly as possible. Our agencies are planning as we speak for this as we speak, but this can't happen in silos. The housing, people that are building housing, people that are building energy infrastructure, the people that are building transport or water infrastructure, that needs to be much more connected than it currently is. I would argue that at the moment, there's an awful lot of siloed thinking happening in these areas. And again, if you look at the cities around the world that have done this correctly, that's not the case. Like equally, I've just finished a piece of research with colleagues in the School of Physics, and we looked at the electrification of our private car fleets. And when you get outside of the more urban areas and into rural areas, the grid comes under huge pressure. And a colleague of mine in physics, basically, he's the only person that works, or the only person in his area that has an electric vehicle. And he reckons if somebody else gets an electric vehicle in his area, that there will be, the grid won't be able to cope with it. The transport sector has a pipeline of projects, but the talent and capacity is also required to complete these projects. We're not producing enough civil engineers. We're not within Trinity, within the universities right across the Greater Dublin area. I suspect maybe 100 civil engineers will graduate this year. We need to get more students into civil engineering because all of the capacity and all of the jobs are there. Not saying I know there's colleagues on here from mechanical and electronic engineering. We need those too. We need the planners. We need everybody. Analogy that I use quite often is the movie that came out a couple of years ago, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that's almost like what we need to do. This year marks 100 years since the start of construction of Ardna Crusha, and that was a massive national effort. It took a lot of trust and bravery to produce that huge energy project, and our country would not be the same without it. It's this type of spirit and this type of national reset, I suppose, that we need for in the new national development plan to deliver all of the infrastructure that is required. And then this is my final slide. By doing everything that I talked about in terms of transport, it benefits all of these things. It benefits our climate. It'll benefit our economy. It will benefit housing, resilience, and well-being. We all want to live in a city and we all want to live in areas that are well connected, have good clean air, have the type of housing stock that we require. But over the next decade, there will be pain in the construction of these projects. Roads will be closed. There will be metro will upend the city for a couple of years. But we need to think past that. We need to think of the 60-year time horizon and what that will look like, and look at the cities around the world that have managed to do this and where they are now. And many of those cities are not in the top 10, top 5 where we find ourselves at the moment in terms of congestion. And at that, I will stop and hand back to you, Geraldine.
Thank you, Brian, for that very, very interesting talk. I was struck by so many different things you said, but in particular, two things. One, that we should view the perspective of the Metrolink about what we're losing on a daily basis, because too much is about how much it's going to cost and all of the other issues around it and what we need to do to get it there. But actually, if we bring it back to what are we losing every single day without when we don't have it, I think that's really interesting. But also, I was really struck by that 2012 comparison to 2012 to 2024, that we're actually walking less, using public transport less, and using our car more. And I mean, I know there were only small percentages, but over that 12-year period that we haven't made improvements just seems really starkly disappointing. So anyway, there's still more questions. So I'm going to try and get through a few of these. The first one is, how much does stakeholder engagement and consultation matter in building infrastructure, and what projects have done it well?
I would say it is one of the most important things. You need to bring people with you. There's a project that I'm involved in with the School of Geography in UCD called Conundrum, and it's all about local governance. It's all about empowering people. It's all about bringing people with you. You need to start the dialogue early about projects. You need to make people aware that these projects are happening, from massive metro projects to small cycle lanes. The governance and the consultation is so important. And as part of that conundrum project, I was sitting in a room with a number of stakeholders, and there was a couple of people in there that did not want to do what we were suggesting to do in terms of sustainable transport. And somebody who was on the pro side of it, wanted all the cycle lanes and all the rest, said, "Oh, you need to watch out for that person there. He's going to give you a really hard time." And I said, "Well, do you know what the most important thing about that person is that he's here, and he's here to listen, and he's here to engage." So I think dialogue is massively important. Information is massively important too. There's far too much disinformation that happens, from people saying that an electric car is like a white good, or saying that the metro is going to cost 500 billion euro. There's far too much disinformation. That's why research and education are so important, to have data out there to inform and to change the public narrative. And just finally on this, one of the things that, like, around Metro and the houses in Ranelagh, the thing that gave me the most positivity about Metro since I've been talking about it was the collective national sigh and groan that happened when the judicial review went in. And when that was palpable, and when that happened, I was like, everybody wants this to happen. And thankfully that's all been resolved, and it looks like everything is going ahead. But stakeholder engagement, that's why, the engineers need to work with the political scientists, need to work with the sociologists, with the geographers, and we can't do all of this in silos. We've tried to do it in silos, and it doesn't work.
Okay, and then in terms of, I suppose, in sort of the same area, do you think the government is doing enough to encourage public transport and to roll? I mean, you're talking about public transport projects essentially, but do you think they're doing enough to get to give people alternatives to cars?
Not quick enough. Not quick enough. The thing that I would say is that, because of the recession, there was a pause of about a decade in public transport projects. And a lot of the projects that we had there with planning permission, DART Underground had planning permission, Metro North had planning permission. So these projects, then the planning permissions for those expired. And then we had to start again. So there was a lost decade in terms of delivery of public transport. We did deliver Lewis Cross City, but there was a lost decade there in terms of public transport. We need to be delivering an awful lot more quickly. The recent National Development Plan, about the ratio between the spend. Apparently, if you break down that spend, it is still around 2 to 1 in terms of new projects. But we just need to be delivering a lot quicker. The other thing I would say is the capacity within the system. Like, we can plan everything we want and have all of these amazing cost benefit analysis and all of these projects, but it's the getting the shovels in the ground and delivering. That's the thing. I think government can sign off all these checks, Apple money and all the rest, but it's the capacity within the system to actually deliver, I think, is going to be the real thing that's going to maybe trip us up. Like, even that what I mentioned about Metro, where are the people going to live that are going to build that project? And I don't think we're being proactive enough yet to look at that issue. I know in Melbourne and Sydney that they were much more proactive in getting in construction workers from right around that region to deliver the projects there. We need to up our game there.
I know we do have a capacity issue with public transport, but could we not be doing just simpler things as well as all of these big projects like Park and Ride? Just again, just making it simple to go door to door without having to resort to your car. Because I mean, we talk about M50 congestion. We know people are spending longer and longer in their car. Most people do not actually want to be doing that. It's wear and tear on their car. It's cost and time. As you say, it's time lost that could be spent with their families. So, is there not other simple things we could be doing that we're just not exploring? Or where is the lack of motivation for those?
Um, there was the report that came out there 2 years ago, Moving Ireland, that had things like that in it. Did have park and ride, did have changing costs around parking and things like that. That lost a bit of momentum, but I do think we need to start to think a bit more radically about things, as you say. And at the park and ride, like, why is there not park and ride sites? And we see it happening kind of organically with the numbers of cars that are parked at intersections going onto the motorway network. So it is happening organically. So the demand for it is there. An awful lot of the things I think around transport that could be quick fixes, that we overanalyze them, and then we kind of go, well, if there's not a cost benefit ratio, or if there, if we can't 100% say this is going to work, then we won't do it. So in often cases, perfection is the enemy of the good. Why not trial? Open up a field, put some gravel down, and trial a bus route that comes in the M7 or the M4, whatever it is, and see how effective that could be. Because as you say, you're 100% right, Charlie. Nobody wants this situation that we currently have. Nobody at all wants it. And the kind of things I spoke about there, a lot of people around the M50 this evening will be retired by the time some of these projects that could cause this alleviation, which is really depressing. And people have joked at me before, Brian, you'll get a free ticket for the for Metro when it's open, because you'll have your bus pass to be able to use it. So we need to be quicker in terms of delivering all of this infrastructure, and think outside of the box too.
Yeah, and I think the point you make there is, if we look at some of the most successful projects across Europe, they've very much been, we're going to try this now. We are open to see how it works. We will tweak it as we go, and then we'll come up with a solution that works for everyone. But it is the ability to be brave enough to say, look, let's just try it. Let's trial it. Let's see what works. Instead of this idea of, unless it's perfect, unless it works for everyone, and it never is going to, let's be honest, that we won't do it. So that's a big issue. Just there's two questions here, basically about the same thing, which is, what is the carbon footprint of these mega transport projects? Because obviously it's huge. So how do we justify all of that?
So yeah, obviously Metro is going to use tons and tons of concrete, which is the most carbon intense, one of the most carbon intensive materials that we have. But if you look at the life cycle cost, over the 60 years that we look at in terms of analysis for something like Metro, in terms of the carbon that's going to be reduced because of less car kilometers driven, it does outweigh it. I think so, something like a Metro, we look at these are Department of Finance guidelines over a 60-year period. Look at metro systems right across the world. They last hundreds of years. So the long game in terms of reducing emissions are there for all of these projects. And if we were to go down that line, what's the alternative? What's the alternative if we don't do it? And there isn't an alternative if we don't do that. And like during the week, there was again talk about working from home, and like, congestion is really bad. But do we do COVID level restrictions again in order to alleviate congestion? I think it is one of the solutions, working from home, but it's such a, it has such other knock-on impacts that it can't be the only solution.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it doesn't work for all types of business. And we see why a lot of people have migrated back to the office for very good reasons. And just on that topic of engagement and stakeholders, again, another question is, how can businesses be part of the solution? And we know that they're one of the biggest objectors to a lot of the changes is local business, whether it's cycle lanes or whether it's car restrictions. So I mean, I know engagement obviously and communication is a big thing, but how can it be sold as a business prospect as well to them, something that it is an economic benefit?
You're 100% right. Engagement is massively important, and it is businesses that object. What I would say that and maybe it's a trick that we're missing. There's an awful lot of businesses that benefit hugely from the pedestrianisation and cycle lanes. Is to use those as exemplars, to produce case studies that show if there's a cycle lane outside, your footfall is going to increase by X, and your spend is going to increase as well. So to use that kind of case to bring businesses along, and businesses change is scary, and change is something, this is their bread and butter. And this is how they feed their families, and many other families are fed that way. But it it's so important to have this evidence to show other businesses that it works, and then having the mentality that look, if it doesn't work, we'll take it out. And if there is if it's not working, we'll remove it. Like 2 years ago, when we lost our minds over what was happening at the end of O'Connell Bridge, that would be gone by now if it wasn't working. We see the bus times have decreased, walking has increased, cycling has increased. A key thing around having businesses on board and bringing them with you is to count everything. And another thing I say to my students, if you don't count it, it doesn't count. And you have sensors everywhere that look at this. And I was talking at an event in Tramore during the week, and we were talking about summer streets in Tramore, that you could close down the promenade. And what I said to the local engineer is put sensors everywhere and get rid of the water battery and show the facts and figures. And that's so important, to use the evidence, to bring people with you.
Yeah, and I think that feeds into this whole transparency aspect as well, that people can see it. I noticed that about any sort of changes to the city centre in Dublin, even though there has been engagement online and there's been lots of publicity, people always turn around and go, we were never told, we can't see the evidence. Whereas if you have very clear stats and figures about the numbers of people using something, it's very easy, it's black and white for people to understand it. And on the subject of cycle lanes, are local authorities building enough cycle lanes? What are the barriers to more cycle lanes? Is it money? Is it staff? Is it road space? Is it other things?
I think it's all of the above, to be honest. I think capacity is one issue, that there was, some local authorities are sending money back to the NTA because they don't have the capacity to deliver, or they've been delayed because of objections. I think that's one of the things that happens. I think in another way, perfection is the enemy of the good. In some cases, when it comes to cycle lanes, like that issue a couple of years ago in Galway with the down in Salt Hill, if there had been a mentality around, in that city, to say, let's trial it. If it doesn't work, we'll take it out. I suspect that that cycle lane would have gone ahead, and it would still be there today, and it would still be quite successful. The other thing again is to go back to counting, because you'll hear people go, well, I live on a cycle lane and no one ever uses it. But if I look at the cycling data, and one of the things I get my fourth year students to do is to use the data from Dublin, where there's cycle counters right across our city, and all you see is increases, in the amount of cycling that's used. Again, it's using that data to go back and to try and win that argument. But there's upper limit on what cycling can do, because of the sheer physical, exertion from cycling and the distances that are involved. So cycling is a massive part of the solution. But as you saw in the stats there, we're probably at 5% in Dublin. Um, will we ever get to the levels that they have in Copenhagen and other cities? Perhaps, but it's a generational thing. It's something that will happen. That takes a long time to happen. It rains less in Dublin, and it's a flatter city than most others, but it takes time. And it's about awareness and education as well. And equally, like, say maybe 10, 15 years ago, we didn't really teach in civil engineering how to design cycleways. And now we do. There's a lot of, time spent on designing cycleways and designing not roads, but space for people to move on, as opposed to being specific really about the vehicles and making sure everybody is safe.
I think the issue as well with cycle lanes is they need to be everywhere. So when you start your journey, you can go from A to B, on a cycle path. The problem is when they stop, you can have very inexperienced cyclists who have been lured into cycling because there's a really nice one outside my front door. But if it only goes 3 kilometers, and then you're left, but dicing with buses and cars for another, half a kilometer, that can put you off, and it can be very dangerous. So there is an issue of inconsistency, and there is also a perception problem that people, I think they should be chock a block with cycles, with bikes, to be busy and to be working, whereas they're not supposed to be, because they obviously move people a lot quicker. So I think that there's a lot of issues around our perception of cycle lanes. And we're coming towards the end. Just one very quick question. In your presentation, you obviously mentioned the role of electric cars, and electric cars are a big part of our climate, targets in terms of achieving them. What do you think the slightly watering down of the 2035 ICE ban, or new petrol and diesel ban, is going to do to sales in Ireland?
Well, I'm a bit of a fraud answering this because you know more about this than I do.
Oh, but I wanted to hear your opinion, Brian.
um, I Yeah, it will obviously it sends a signal to people to go, well, if people were on the cusp of going, my next car was going to be electric or hybrid electric, then they'll go, well, probably have another two cars that could be diesel or petrol. So I think signals like that are not very good in terms of getting people to transition over. But I think one of the key things, and we see this all the time, and is when we see more people using, and it goes for cycling, it goes for using public transport as well. When we see more electric vehicles out there, when we see more charging points happening right across the country, and it becomes the norm, I think it will happen naturally because anybody that owns an EV, that they're so easy to drive. I've got one sat outside my house right now. In terms of cost, in terms of everything, they're a much better vehicle. And yeah, as I said, the costs are a lot lower. But I'm sure you've got an opinion on it as well, Geraldine.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it'll do is EVs will continue to grow. There's no doubt about that. Car companies have invested hugely in them. They're not going to roll back now because of that. But I do think it'll create uncertainty and it will probably mean that EVs will grow at a slightly slower rate than we would have expected. And I think it's unfortunate for that cohort who are so difficult to convince of the benefits of EVs. This just further strengthens their idea that they're not the real solution, that it's going to be watered down even further in the, as we get towards 2035. So I think anything that creates uncertainty is not to be welcomed, really.
Definitely.
It's a pity to end on that bad note or on that slightly depressing note. But thank you so much for today and for all of your insights. I am sorry that we didn't get to what was loads of questions, but we did try and cover as much, and you covered a huge amount in your talk anyway. So all that's left for me to say is that our next event in our series, which is Balanced Solutions for a Better World, will take place on Friday, the 13th of February, the same time as today from 1 to 2 p.m. The talk is entitled Knowing Me, Knowing You, the Scrutability of Proactive Intelligence Personalised Agents, and the speaker will be Professor Owen Conlon from the School of Computer Science. Now, full details are available at the website tcd.ie/E3. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you to Brian and to Michael.
Thank you both.